The voicemail came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of signing papers at my accountant's office when my phone buzzed on the table. I saw my son's number, figured it could wait, and set it face down. 20 minutes later, when I stepped into the elevator, I pressed play. It wasn't my son's voice. It was my daughter-in-law. "Just a reminder," she said, and I could hear the clink of what sounded like a wine glass in the background. The mortgage payment was due on the 1st. "It's the 14th. Are you going to handle that, or do we need to talk?" I stood in that elevator for a long time after the doors opened on the ground floor. I just stood there, listening to the hum of the building, thinking about how she'd said, "Are you going to handle that?" Like I was a contractor who'd missed a deadline. Like she was my boss. I pressed the lobby button again. Rode back up, rode back down, just to have something to do with my hands. "My name is Vincent. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a residential construction company in the Fraser Valley, poured every dollar back into properties when the work was slow, and by the time I was 57, I owned 4 units outright and had a partial stake in 2 more. Nothing flashy, no penthouse, just solid, boring, working-class real estate that quietly appreciated while I got older and my knees got worse. My son, Theo, is 30. He has never owned a tool. He has never filed a tax return that didn't show a loss. He has, however, always had very strong opinions about the best restaurants in Vancouver, the right neighborhood to live in, and why his father's Ford F-150 is embarrassing to be seen in. I paid for his undergraduate degree at UBC. I paid for the year he spent finding himself in Portugal, which cost me close to $18,000 and produced 1 watercolor painting that hangs in what is now his wife's home office. When he told me he wanted to get a master's degree in urban planning, I said fine, and I paid for that too. When he graduated and couldn't find work that matched his vision, I carried him, not extravagantly. A couple thousand a month, help with his car insurance, things like that. I told myself it was temporary. That's always what I told myself. Then he met Simone. Simone came from money, or at least she dressed like she did. Her family was from West Vancouver. Her father was some kind of import consultant, retired early, spent winters in Palm Springs. The first time I met her at dinner, she spent 20 minutes explaining why she only ate fish from specific suppliers and looked at my hands the entire time I was talking, the way people do when they're mentally categorizing you. I should have paid attention to that. Theo called me 6 months into their relationship to tell me they decided to move in together, not asking, telling. And could I help them with a place? The rent market was insane right now, Dad, you know how it is, and they'd found this gorgeous 2-bedroom in Kitsilano, 1,200 square feet, close to the water, $4,200 a month. I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for 3 days. Then I went to look at it with him because I was his father and I wanted to see what my money was going toward. It was a nice place. High ceilings, good light. The kind of apartment that looks like a magazine if you have the right furniture, which of course they would want. I told him I'd cover $2,500 of the rent each month if he picked up the rest himself. He agreed immediately, which told me he'd already planned on me saying yes. That was 2 years ago. In those 2 years, Theo's contribution to the rent had quietly dropped to $700 a month, then $400, then, as I later found out, nothing. Each time he had a reason. A consulting contract that fell through. A medical bill. Simone's student loan payment. I kept paying and he kept explaining and I kept telling myself this was almost over. He was almost on his feet. It was almost time. My brother Ken used to say, "Vince, you don't have a son, you have a subscription." I laughed it off. Ken doesn't have kids. He doesn't understand what it's like, I told myself. I understand now that Ken understood perfectly. The wedding happened on a Saturday in September. I didn't know about it until the following Monday. It wasn't that I wasn't invited. It's more complicated than that, and also simpler. About 3 weeks earlier, Theo had called me, not Simone, Theo himself, to say that they were planning something small. Intimate, he said, just close friends. He danced around it the whole call and finally said, I think it's better if it's just her people and mine, keep it tight. I asked what that meant. There was a long pause, and then he said, Simone's family has a certain thing they're going for, a vibe, and she's worried that, I told her you'd be fine, but she's worried it might be. He stopped again. She just wants it to feel cohesive. I'm 63 years old. I've been to more job sites, client meetings, bank negotiations, and city hall hearings than I can count. I know how to read what someone is really saying. What my son was telling me was that his fiancée didn't want me at their wedding because I didn't fit the aesthetic she was going for. I said, I see. He said, Dad, it's not. I said, Theo, it's fine, and I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a while after that. I have a good kitchen. I built it myself, actually, during a slow winter about 15 years ago. Sherry cabinets, stone counters, a farmhouse sink I drove 4 hours to pick up because I found it at an estate sale for $200. It's not a Kitsilano kitchen. It's a real one. I thought about calling Ken. I didn't. I just made coffee and watched the light change in the yard and thought about 30 years of receipts. I didn't go to the wedding. I didn't send a gift. I didn't ask to see photos. I waited. On Monday morning, 2 days after they apparently stood in front of an officiant at some gastown venue with exposed brick and a cocktail bar, my phone rang. I picked up. It was Simone. Vincent. She never called me anything warmer than that. Never Dad. Never even Vince. The rent payment didn't come through. The 15th is in 2 days. Can you sort that? I want to be very precise about this moment because I've thought about it a lot since. She had just gotten married. She had just deliberately excluded me from the most significant moment in her life with my son, for reasons she'd made clear enough, even without saying them out loud. She had done this without any apparent discomfort. And now, 2 days later, with what I can only describe as absolute serenity, she was calling me to make sure I was going to pay her rent. There was something almost impressive about it. The confidence required, the complete absence of any recognition that this might be a strange phone call to make. Simone, I said, congratulations on the wedding. A beat. Thank you. How was it? It was lovely. Listen, about was it a big ceremony? Another pause, shorter, about 70 people. That's not small, I said. It was intimate for us. She had moved on to impatient now. Vincent, the rent, can you deal with that today? I said, I'll have to look at my accounts. I'll call you back. I didn't call her back. Instead, I called my lawyer, Dawn, who I've worked with for 20 years and who has the calming presence of a man who has seen everything twice. I told him the situation. He asked a few questions. He said, so the lease is in Theo's name? I said, yes. He said, and you've been paying as a third party? I said, yes. He said, okay, you want to stop? I said, yes. Dawn drafted a letter the next morning. Not hostile, just factual. It noted that as of the current date, the voluntary financial contributions I had been making on behalf of the tenant would cease. It was addressed to my son. I had Dawn send it to the apartment. Then I called the property management company and told them that any future payments would need to come directly from the tenant, as my contributions had ended. That was a Wednesday. On Thursday, Theo called. He wasn't angry at first. He sounded confused, the way he used to sound when he was a teenager, and I'd told him no about something, and he genuinely couldn't process it. "Dad, what's going on? We got a letter from your lawyer." "I know," I said. "I sent it." "You sent a—" He stopped. "Is this about the wedding?" "It's about a lot of things." "Dad, we explained that. Simone needed—" "I know what Simone needed," I said, "and now I need to stop paying rent for adults who are capable of covering their own expenses." He was quiet for a moment. "We're not in a position right now." "I know. You've told me that for 2 years. That's not fair." "Theo," I said, and I tried to say it the way I used to say it when he was small and I needed him to actually hear me. "When you were 8 years old, I took you to a job site and I showed you how to read a blueprint. You remember that?" He didn't say anything. "You were so proud of yourself. You understood the whole thing by the end of the day. You were a smart kid, you still are. But somewhere I stopped showing you things and started just paying for things, and that's on me as much as it's on you. I should have been harder when it mattered. I wasn't. But I'm not going to keep going the same direction just because I've been going it for a long time." He hung up. Simone didn't call me again. I expected her to. I'd half prepared for it, mentally rehearsed staying calm through whatever she decided to say. She didn't call. She apparently had enough confidence to ask for money, but not enough to fight for it when it stopped coming. That told me something too. 3 weeks later, Don informed me that the property management company had issued a notice to the tenants for non-payment. Standard procedure. They had 10 days to either pay or vacate. During those 10 days, my son sent me 7 text messages. The first few were explanatory. They were working on it. Simone's father was looking into helping. It would be resolved. Then they got shorter. "Dad, please, can we talk? I don't understand why you're doing this." I read all of them. I didn't respond to any. On day 8, Simone's father apparently offered to cover 2 months. I know this because Theo called me, and this time he was genuinely frantic, and in the middle of the call he said, "Her dad said he'd help for now, but he can't do this long term. He's on a fixed income." And I thought, so am I. I also thought, so her family does have the capacity to help. They just preferred that I do it. Day 10 came. They hadn't paid. The management company began the formal eviction process. Under BC's Residential Tenancy Act, that takes time. It's not instant, but it is real, and it moved forward. Theo called my brother Ken. I found this out because Ken called me very carefully and said, "Theo reached out. He sounds like he's in a bad place." I said, "I know." Ken said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I think so." There was a pause, and then Ken said, "For what it's worth, I think you're right." I didn't say anything. He said, "The wedding thing, Vince. The wedding thing was something else." It was. It really was. In November, they vacated the apartment. I don't know exactly where they went. I heard through Ken, who heard from Theo, that they were staying with Simone's parents in West Vancouver temporarily. I imagined that household, the son who'd never worked, the daughter who'd built her life around a certain image, the retired import consultant in his Palm Springs condo looking at the situation. And I hoped, genuinely hoped, that Theo would be uncomfortable enough to finally move. I spent that November doing something I probably should have done years earlier. I sat down with Dawn and with my accountant, Roberta, who I've worked with almost as long as Dawn, and we looked at everything. Every property, every asset, every arrangement I'd made informally over the years. It took about 3 weeks of meetings. At the end of it, I made some changes to my estate documents that reflected the current reality of my relationships. I'm not going to pretend that was easy. I've spent a lot of time in the last year sitting with the discomfort of it, not regret exactly, more like grief. There's something that happens when you finally stop pretending a thing is going to get better. You've been carrying a version of the future in your head for years, the version where your kid pulls it together, where the relationship writes itself, where you look back on all of this and it was just a rough patch. When you stop carrying that version, you feel the weight of it leaving. It's strange. It feels like loss and relief at the same time, and I'm not sure those two things are supposed to go together. My ex-wife Theo's mother called me in December. We've been divorced for 18 years, but we've stayed civil for Theo's sake, and she'd been watching all of this from a distance. She said, "I think you did the right thing." She paused. "I also think we both let him get here." That's hard to sit with. I said, "Yeah." She said, "He's going to be angry for a while." I said, "Probably." I see Ken most weekends now. We drive out toward Chilliwack sometimes, just to drive the way we used to do with our father when we were kids. We don't talk about Theo every time. Usually we talk about the valley, what's being built, what's being torn down. I know this landscape the way I know my own hands. Every subdivision, every back road, every stretch of farmland that's slowly turning into townhomes. I spent my whole working life here. I built things that are still standing. That still matters to me. Theo sent me a message on my birthday in February. Just, "Happy birthday, Dad." No punctuation. I read it 6 times trying to figure out what I was supposed to do with it. I wrote back, "Thank you, son." That's where we are. I'm not carrying a particular hope about how it ends. I've stopped writing futures in my head that haven't happened yet. What I know is that I'm 63 years old. My knees hurt in the mornings. I have a kitchen I built with my own hands, and a truck that runs well, and a brother who answers when I call. Some mornings that feels like enough. Some mornings I still make an extra cup of coffee out of pure habit and don't know who I'm making it for. But I stopped paying for a life I wasn't invited into. And I think, I know, that's the right thing, even when it doesn't feel like it. Especially then. I've been thinking a lot about a conversation I had with my father when I was maybe 22. I'd done something careless. I don't even remember what it was, and instead of getting angry, he just looked at me and said, "Vince, every choice you make is a door. You walk through it, it closes behind you. That's just how it works." I remember thinking that was a pretty bleak way to look at things. I'm older than he was when he said it now, and I think he was exactly right. What happened with Theo didn't start with the wedding. It didn't start with Simone. It started years earlier in all the small moments where I chose the easy thing, the check, the transfer, the quiet agreement, instead of the harder thing that might have actually helped him. I told myself I was being a good father. I think I was being a comfortable one, which isn't the same. A good father teaches his kid how to read a blueprint. A comfortable one just keeps paying the contractor. What I understand now is that there's a version of love that asks nothing of the person you're giving it to, and that version, however warm it feels in the moment, does real damage over time. Theo didn't learn how to be accountable because I never required it of him. He didn't develop the judgment to recognize a person who saw him as a financial arrangement rather than a husband, because I'd never let him sit with consequences long enough to develop that kind of clarity. That's not Simone's fault. That's not even entirely Theo's. I built the conditions. I just didn't see it until the bill came due. The thing about cause and effect is that it doesn't care about your intentions. I intended to support my son. The effect was that I taught him the world would absorb his choices without requiring anything back. And when someone raised in that understanding marries someone who shares it, well, you end up with a phone call about rent 2 days after a wedding you weren't invited to. The math is pretty straightforward looking back. What I wish I'd understood earlier, what I'd want Theo to understand now, wherever he is in working through all of this, is that the qualities that actually hold a life together aren't the ones that get handed to you. Integrity isn't inherited. It gets built in the moments when nobody's watching and you do the right thing anyway, the harder thing, the honest thing. Clear thinking, the kind that lets you see a situation for what it is, rather than what you want it to be, that only comes from having to figure things out yourself, from making mistakes that actually cost you something. And the will to keep going when things get hard, to not reach for the nearest person with a checkbook that has to come from inside. Nobody can install it for you. I didn't give Theo enough chances to build any of those things. I stepped in too fast, too often, for too long. And by the time I stopped, the gap between us was wide enough that my stopping felt to him like abandonment rather than what it actually was, the first honest thing I'd done for him in years. I still make that extra cup of coffee sometimes. Old habit. I set it on the counter and then I pour it out. Small things stay with you. But I don't regret the phone call to Dawn. Not for a single morning.